welcome to the District of Sports podcast, our sports podcast here at the Washington Times. I'm George Gerbo. I'll be joined by our sports reporters, Andy Kostka and Matt Paris, here in just a moment. A reminder that you can find us in a variety of ways on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more by searching District of Sports. And you can follow along with Andy and Matt on Twitter and all of their work via the Washington Times sports handle at Wash Times Sports. But we'll get right in and get started. Welcome back, Andy and Matt. Good to hear from you guys once again.
Yeah, thanks for having us as always. It's always fun to do this, and we have a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. We are getting into championship season for a couple of our teams here in the DMV. We'll lead off this edition of the District of Sports with the Washington Wizards, who went into the first ever Eastern Conference play-in tournament in the NBA, as the NBA changed the format here a little bit this year. The Wizards did finish with the 8th seed, good enough in the old days, but now making it a little bit more exciting to add two more teams that can play into these 7 and 8 seeds in the NBA. And they came in with a lot of momentum, Matt. They were 17-6 over the last 23 games. This is after a tumultuous offseason in which they traded franchise star John Wall for Russell Westbrook to the Houston Rockets. And after, in my opinion, what was they were evidently, to me, the worst team in the NBA over the first month of the season, and were able to correct it and figure it out enough, not just to, cling on to the 10 seed, but to make it all the way to the 8 seed. And they get to this game in Boston, and it's a one-game scenario. They're not out of the playoffs. They have a chance to play themselves into the 8th seed. But with Boston's win last night, 118-100 over Washington, Boston now gains the 7th seed. They move on to play Brooklyn in a full 7-game series. Washington now has a game against Indiana, who beat Charlotte, and that game will determine who will win the 8th seed and take on the Philadelphia 76ers in a 7-game series. And it's unfortunate. Boston was only favored in this game by a point, but it was a game a lot of people thought the Wizards had good momentum going into, Matt, with everything. But a couple of things that we'll touch on here that from their style of play that just didn't work out in this game. And of course, you can't overcome the amazing night that Jason Tatum put on. He has found his game in these final couple of weeks of the season. He went for 50 points, and 23 of those came in the third quarter, which is really where Boston kind of put some distance between themselves and the Wizards and held on for the long run.
Yeah, I think it was a game. One, the Wizards picked a bad time to have their worst game in a while. This was the worst they've played really in this 7-week stretch since, they started to turn their season around. But, the Wizards have a lot of guys who are inexperienced. Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, those guys are playoff caliber players. They can perform in big moments, but you look at the rest of the roster. Rui Hachimura, 5 fouls. He got into huge foul trouble, and if he was out there, maybe he could have guarded Jason Tatum. They were just really put in mismatch after mismatch because of lineups. That some of that has to do with roster construction as well. But Hachimura didn't show up. Davis Bertans was 0 of 7 from 3. He didn't really have a big role in San Antonio when they were in the playoffs always, so he doesn't really have big game experience moments. And I just think the moment got to them a little bit. This was their chance to perform and make a statement, and they just really didn't show up, except for Beal, who had a nice game, and Ish Smith. And Russell Westbrook, he had a great stat line, but his shooting was all over the place, and he didn't look nearly as explosive as he had been. And he said after the game that he's dealing with some nicks and bruises, so we'll see how that impacts the game against Indiana on Thursday. But I was a little bit surprised, especially considering how they were rolling and how they've had a tendency to come back in these games if they fall behind, but it just didn't happen here.
It's the quietest 20 points from Russell Westbrook that he's probably ever scored in his career. It was just not until looking at the stats afterward, it's like, oh, Russ had 20 tonight. Like that just didn't seem like he did that, because there was never a point when Washington seemed to put everything. They did go on a run that led them leading by 2 at halftime, but just never any kind of full thrust push from them to kind of take over this game. And Boston Boston wins by 18 points, but Boston really never put it away. They just kind of got staked out to a lead and just incrementally continued to score some points, and Washington just wasn't able to close the deficit. You mentioned Davis Bertans. I was watching the game with my roommate, and at one point he asked me to guess, like, how many threes do you think he's taken so far? And I was like, probably at least 6, and he had missed all of them at that point. He finished 0 from 7 from the field, and that was a guy, Matt, that they signed in the offseason and put a big money contract on to kind of perform in these type of moments. And it was unfortunate to see that they kind of got caught up in the moment, and he wasn't able to contribute in the way Washington needed him to.
Yeah, he's really had an up and down season all year. He had a great season last year coming off a contract, and a contract year, put up great numbers. And he is historically a very good shooter, but, he showed up to this season kind of out of shape because he was coming over from Latvia, and, he didn't have the chance to really play 5-on-5 and get up to NBA condition because of lockdown over there. And he's kind of struggled to find a rhythm really all season, but through this 7-week stretch, it started to kind of all click together. I don't have his shooting numbers in front of me, but they were a lot better than 0%. I'll tell you that much. And Bertans is a tricky player because when his shooting isn't there, there isn't a lot more that he can do to still be productive. He's not a good defender. He's an okay cutter. He's a good ball handler, I guess. You could maybe have him run a pick and roll here and there, but that's not what the Wizards do with Westbrook and Beal so ball dominant. So there was really no need for him to initiate the offense, and when he's not shooting, it's just the offense kind of falls apart.
The Wizards, and just kind of one thing that I saw was, I know Scott Brooks is very religious with his rotations, and that to the fan base can be kind of infuriating sometimes. They were out there with 4 guards for a big stretches of the game. He stuck with Alex Len more than I thought he was going to. I kind of wanted to see
Robin Lopez or there was Gasper.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, Robin Lopez, because Lopez was the only, I don't want to say the only guy getting inside, but you were seeing him trying, just, you got to get a few, if you're going to try and get something going, you've got to get a few buckets. And the easiest way to do that is try and get inside. And so Lopez is trying to hold his own out there. But when you're working with 4 guards, you're living by one method of scoring there. And he just wasn't, they just weren't able to get anything going.
Yeah. I mean, they just didn't really have anyone to throw at Tatum. I mean, Kemba Walker had a really great game as well. That was another thing. Like Boston had kind of limped into the regular season here without to the play-in rather, because they were missing Jaylen Brown, and so they really needed Walker to step up, and he did. That's where Washington's defensive inefficiency still kind of showed up. You would really need like Westbrook to kind of clamp him down or someone, but Boston was putting Westbrook in mismatches with Tatum. They were posting him up, they were putting him in bad positions. They were just really taking advantage of Washington's lack of size on the floor.
The Wizards move on, and they will at least get a home game out of this. They'll be back at Capital One Arena, what could be the final game of the season for them, against Indiana, who just beat the crap out of Charlotte, 144-117. Man, they are clicking at the right time, are the Pacers, Matt. And if Russ in particular these have been good games this season. Of all the games Wizards have played, the games against the Nets this season were very entertaining, and the games against Indiana, which is like kind of surprising, but those were very entertaining games because there's very similar styles. Russ had 27 points. This has scored 27 points so far this season in games against Indiana, averaging 18 rebounds and 20 assists. And for Indiana, if Russell Westbrook is the king of the triple-double, then Domantas Sabonis wants to stake out his claim and try and be the prince of the triple-double, because he is kind of doing this in that same manner. 14 points and 21 rebounds against Charlotte in that play-in game. Fell 1 assist short with 9 assists of a triple-double. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a good game. It's going to be entertaining. Washington will at least have the benefit of being back at home, which should be a little bit more comfortable for them. And I think, as you've mentioned, you've got to see those guys like Rui Hachimura, like Raul Neto, that are new to this experience of being in in games that matter, for lack of a better term, not necessarily quote unquote playoff games, but play in games. They need to see that secondary scoring coming from the Wizards to help out, and not just from Ish Smith, if they're going to advance and be able to make it into play against Philadelphia in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. I mean, the Pacers are going to be without Karis LeVert, and so that really hurts them there. But Sabonis has been really good. These games, if Westbrook can get back to that level, I mean, you read the stats. They were so. I think the Pacers, that's the best he's played against any opponent this year. He had 2 historic games of the 3, and then in the third one, Bradley Beal put up 50 points. And Bradley Beal said after the game, we can refer to him as the one-legged bandit, and that's kind of a funny line, but that's very concerning given his hamstring injury. And I think what we've seen with Beal over the last 2 games is that he can still be a productive player, but it takes time for him to warm up. He's pretty much like a non-factor in the first half of these games, first quarter, just because it takes him a little bit of time to I don't know, shake the tightness off or something like that. Like it just, that hamstring is clearly bothering him. He's still a gifted scorer, so he can find ways to be productive. But they really need Russell Westbrook here to kind of lift them, just like he has in the other games against Indiana, because Sabonis is playing at an incredibly high level.
Wizards swept the regular season series with the Pacers this year. That's the first time they've done that in 15 years. So they'll need that momentum, hopefully, to carry over here as they play for their season against Indiana at Capital One Arena. Capital One Arena also saw a couple of very exciting playoff games on the ice as the Capitals start their first round series with the Boston Bruins. That series now shifts to Boston, Andy, and 2 games, both go into overtime, won by Nick Dowd for the Caps in game 1 and Brad Marchand for Boston in game 2 on kind of a late mistimed line change by Carl Hagelin, who skates to the bench and he leaves Washington with only 4 players in the defensive zone, and Boston's able to, on a beautiful cross ice pass, to get it to Marchand, and they win the game just 39 seconds into overtime. So the series is even. Beneath the surface for that are some kind of not underlying issues, but some things that need to be worked out here for the Capitals. Namely, as we talked before the show here, just in terms of their lineup, Peter Laviolette is not revealing too much of his hand so far. They're trying to get Evgeny Kuznetsov back from the NHL's COVID-19 protocols. The same goes for Ilya Samsonov, who was on that same list. How close or how far, or your hunch of where these guys are in terms of that process and what that's going to mean for the Capitals in their lineup?
Well, both guys have been cleared from the protocol, so they technically can play, or at least that's what Laviolette believes, that they can technically play. It's more of a question. They have not really been on the ice or in a game in 2.5 or so weeks. So jumping straight from nothing to a playoff game, especially games of this kind of physicality and speed with Boston, I think it's been 11 straight playoff games against Boston that have been decided by 1 goal, which is just kind of crazy to think
it's
about.
Insane, yeah.
It's going to be one of those series, and so it's a lot to ask Samsonov, especially I think as a goaltender, to kind of jump in, especially with Craig Anderson playing as well as he is. I don't think there's as much rush there. There is a rush a little bit with Kuznetsov, just because the center depth is so thin right now, especially with Lars Eller. He left midway through the second period on Monday night in that overtime loss with a lower body injury. So we'll see. I mean, Laviolette, of course, does not dive too into tipping his hand or whatever you want to call it for what the lineup might look like for Game 3 or even beyond that. Who knows? But yeah, you'd expect that if any of them is going to come back sooner, it's probably going to be Kuznetsov. They both were on the ice practicing for morning skate this morning, Monday morning. Or what day is it? Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday morning. But if that means they're actually going to play or not, it's a different story. So we'll kind of find out at 6:30 tonight when the puck drops. But it would be a big boost if they had Kuznetsov back, because There are issues with center depth right now.
Yeah, your story at WashingtonTimes.com/sports hits on that, specifically when it comes down to faceoffs. You're facing the Capitals are the league's number one team in the Boston Bruins, who won 55% of their draws in this series. It's 61% so far, 61.5%. 80 of 130 draws have gone to the Capitals. And when you've got the depth and you've got guys in there who have a better chance of getting it, it's going to, just in terms of keeping possession, whether it's you're in the defensive zone and getting it out, or if you get a face off and you get a shot on goal and the puck's frozen and you get a face off in the offensive zone, turning those face offs into possession turns them into sustained scoring chances and could lead to Washington breaking the series out. They've got Boston, Boston's top line, I think, is the best line in hockey, but Washington is obviously a team that has a propensity to score with one of the best power plays in the league. And in order to get those things clicking and rolling in this series, they're going to need to increase their percentage at the dot, which is 49.2 over the course of the regular season. They won the Stanley Cup, as you write in your story, in 2018, when they weren't above 50% on faceoffs, but it's something here in such a tough series against Boston, with how specifically with how good Boston is on their own end winning those faceoffs, that they're going to want to correct here.
Yeah, I think some of the advanced stat heads in hockey kind of think faceoff percent numbers are kind of overrated, and they might have a point, just because you could have like a breakaway and it still counts as a goal, and you could have all the offensive zone you want, and it doesn't equal the goal.
You win the face-off and you turn it over immediately after.
Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily, but you win 40% of your draws, and that's a pretty low number. I think Laviolette, when I asked about it yesterday, he was pretty adamant that they need to figure that out, because it's not, it's just pure, offensive possession, zone time doesn't necessarily equal goals, but if you continually give up, face-offs, it's not a great situation. 4 times in the last decade, though, there is a precedent that face-off winning percentage doesn't necessarily equal success. I mean, the Caps did it; they won the Stanley Cup with under 50% face-off wins. The Penguins, the LA Kings, and the Chicago Blackhawks all did it. The Penguins, I think, had the worst one in the playoffs with 47% when they did it a couple years ago. But 47% and 40% are, is a decent difference. It's probably like 4 or 5 face-offs a game that's kind of going in the other direction. So yeah, that's a big thing that Washington kind of needs to figure out. It probably means tying the puck up more, kind of getting some scrums, all 6 forwards, in the circle, trying to get that puck a bit more scrappy. I don't think, the finesse is not maybe the way to do it in the circle right now, but Kuznetsov coming back might be a little bit of a help. TJ Oshie has been, if he comes back, that is, TJ Oshie has been filling in as a center. In the meantime, he's really a winger. He has plenty of experience on doing faceoffs because he does faceoffs pretty frequently on the power play. So, he's not exactly a rookie, but his percentage so far this series hasn't been great. And with Oshie too, I mean, he wasn't skating at Wednesday's morning skate. So we'll kind of see if, what he, again, Laviolette did not delve into details of if he's available for the game, which is his style. But we'll see just kind of what those face-off numbers look like. But again, like, it's every team, not just Boston, but every team, has plays off of face-offs, and it can be pretty important to win, especially situationally on the PK or the power play. If you can win a decent number of those, kind of limits their chances for kind of a clear shot straight off a face-off.
Another part of the lineup that we talked about a few weeks ago, figuring out where it was going to settle down, was in net for the Capitals. This unfortunately comes a little more urgent because of an injury situation, not totally by Peter Laviolette's choice. Vitek Vanacek injured on the first goal of the game by Jake DeBrusk in game 1, and was just super late on reacting to it, almost as if he didn't see it, getting his right leg pad out really late and then just kind of rolling over. So in terms of speculation, it looks, I'm going to call it lower body injury, but just wasn't himself early in the game, and you could kind of see him through the the image is straining a little bit through his mask. And so that leads to venerable 39-year-old, soon to be 40-year-old backup Craig Anderson coming in and stopping in game 2. He finished out game 1. The Capitals win. In game 2, even in the loss, 44 saves on 48 shots, which is just an incredible amount. Shot totals are going to go up in the playoffs, but 48 is incredible for a game that only went 40 seconds into overtime. Boston shooting just a crazy clip with that, and he stopped most of those pucks, but it's obviously a situation that Peter Laviolette doesn't want to be in. As good as Anderson was, he spent most of his time with Ottawa. He helped lead the Senators in 2017 to the Game 7, all the way to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals against Pittsburgh. But is there any indication on what Vanacek's health is? And you mentioned a little bit about getting the guys off the protocol list ready, and that includes Ilya Samsonov.
Yeah, so Vanacek was not skating Wednesday morning at morning skate, which kind of, it's not a golden rule, but usually that's an indication that he's not available. He's been day to day with a lower body injury, which is kind of the case for basically every injured player. It's always day to day, always lower body. So, but Vanacek, you figure he's probably not available tonight. If you look at the first stint that Samsonov had on the COVID-19 list, when he was reinstated, it took him a couple weeks to actually get back into a game. So yeah, he was reinstated. We're looking at going on a couple days now, but for him to realistically jump back into the lineup, I'd be surprised. Especially, I don't think there's a huge rush, as I said, with Anderson playing as well as he did. 44 saves is definitely impressive. Yeah, the issue I guess would be 48 shots and 4 of them snuck in, but it's a understandable case that 4 of them snuck by, but 48 shots is a heck of a lot. And yeah, I mean, in playoffs, every team is going to be super aggressive. They're going to shoot on sight. That's what Boston's kind of doing. But the Capitals defense is going to have to, clean that up a little bit. Maybe make zone entry a little bit more difficult for Boston. Whatever it is, we asked about it today, and they're, of course, very, this remain mum on exactly what cleaning it up means, but cleaning it up is the word they used. So that's what they're going to focus on. But I think maybe it's not funny, but an interesting, factoid is the Capitals went into this season kind of thinking Henrik Lundqvist, Vitek Vanacek, and Ilya Samsonov were the in net. And now game 3, well, I guess game 2 especially, none of those 3 dressed, Samsonov, Lundqvist, or Vanacek. And now game 3, we don't really know about, if Samsonov is going to dress or not, or if it's going to be Phoenix Copley as the backup again. That's just kind of it's a pretty crazy dichotomy from where the Capitals thought they'd be to now in the first round of the playoffs. You're with Craig Anderson, who has plenty of playoff experience and is been playing well. So I don't mean to put Craig Anderson
yeah.
here, but it's just definitely a different, very different than what they thought they'd have.
And if you're a Caps fan looking across the league, you've got former Cap Philippe Grubauer starting in Colorado in net, and up in Long Island, Semyon Varlamov, who started game 2 for the Islanders against the Penguins. So you kind of see some of the seeds of Capitals goalies past now planted in different places. It's like, man, we'd like to have one of those guys back now to help shore this up in the first round. 2 games up in Boston, game 3 tonight, game 4 on Friday, before the series shifts back to Capital One Arena on Sunday. Let's round out today's show with the Washington football team, Matt, who see a couple of different personnel moves and some longtime guys transitioning out of the organization and soon to transition out of the organization. First, Ryan Kerrigan is headed to Philadelphia on a 1-year contract. Washington basically, as Kerrigan told ESPN, that they were moving on from him when free agency started, so he was free to move on. He only started once last year, and though he played in all 16 games, he was the number 16 overall pick in the 2011 draft, 4-time Pro Bowler. He's got the Washington team record in sacks with 95.5. And basically, Matt, it seems like just the way and the fast development of Montez Sweat and Chase Young on Washington's defensive line has kind of allowed the team to be okay to part with Kerrigan.
Yeah, I think it was just him coming back was never really that realistic. As the situation dragged on, maybe there was some hope that maybe Washington or him would be open to a return, but Sweat and Chase Young are still going to play the majority of the snaps, and that's what Washington should want given their production and the way that their careers keep ascending. But he goes to Philly. That's interesting because they have two established starters there, and Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett, and he'll still probably be worked into a rotation, but I think it would still be more playing time than he would have received in Washington. So best of luck to him. It'll be weird to see him in an Eagles uniform next year, but I think it kind of worked out best for both parties.
And on the other side of the ball, Morgan Moses has been granted permission to seek a trade, according to one of your sources, paving the way for him to leave the team after 7 seasons. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2014, played every game since 2015, but in the same way. And, I guess it's a good problem to have when the younger guys that you bring in have started to develop and you're able to supplement them with veteran guys. Charles Leno comes in the offseason. Washington also traded for guard Eric Flowers. And we talked a few weeks ago about Sam Cosmi, the tackle they drafted out of Texas. And that's probably the best scenario you're going to want to do. There's only $1.9 million guaranteed on the 2 years left on his contract, as you write. So it's not going to be a significant loss if they're able to swing him and also get something in return in a trade for Morgan Moses.
Right. I mean, at this point, who knows what team is willing to pay his $7.5 million salary. So it looks like I would bet he's probably released. I mean, that seems like the most logical thing to happen. But, it is – I was a little bit surprised by it just because even though that they've gone through this turnover and they've remade their offensive line within the last few weeks, Morgan Moses – the right side of the line for Washington had been so dependable for so many years. Even last year, he was pretty solid. And you have Brandon Sheriff there, but Brandon Sheriff now is going to play on the franchise tag again. So it seems like they want to remake the whole line. And, Moses, with Kerrigan leaving and Nick Sundberg, he was the longest tenured player on Washington. But now, that he won't hold that title for long. So, this is just another move from Ron Rivera. He's cleaning out Ashburn. He's kind of getting rid of all the holdovers from that era, and Morgan Moses was a big voice in that locker room, and I think he had high opinions of Ron Rivera, and I don't necessarily think there were any issues there, but they're remaking that offensive line, and he's kind of the it's an unfortunate cut in that circumstance, or unfortunate parting ways since they haven't cut him yet.
Moses' release and or trade, whatever will happen with him, will save $7.7 million for Washington in salary cap space, and we'll see how that plays out as we get closer to training camp. Guys, once again, thank you as always for being a part. Matt, where can they find your work as you cover the Wizards here in the playoffs, and also any other developments that continue to come out of Ashburn with the WFT?
Yeah, you can find me on the Washington Times website, and then you can also follow me on Twitter at Matthew_Paris.
And Andy, who is on prominently with the Capitals for the next couple of days, and also with the Washington Nationals. Andy, where can folks follow along and find your reporting during Caps games?
Yeah, WashingtonTimes.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at AFKOSTKA.
Thanks, as always, and a reminder to find the Washington Times District of Sports podcast on all of your favorite podcast platforms by searching District of Sports, and follow along with Matt and Andy and the rest of our sports reporting at Wash Time Sports on Twitter. For Andy, for Matt, I'm George, and we'll see you next time.